Welcome to WikiPodcast.
Hello.
Today we're continuing our mini-series exploring global philosophical traditions.
That's right.
And for this third part, we're diving deep into the really rich and diverse philosophical systems that, originated in the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah, it's a huge area.
Think of this as your shortcut to understanding the major schools and ideas from this incredibly influential part of the world.
Our mission today, really, is to survey this vast intellectual landscape. We want to understand how these traditions are classified, what the core schools of thought are, both those that built upon the Vedic tradition and those that kind of branched away.
Right.
We'll also be looking at the fundamental themes, the ideas that weave through many of these systems, and also some of the fascinating points where they diverge, important differences.
Exactly. The material we're exploring today gives a pretty broad overview, touching on the historical development, key concepts, classifications, all that stuff within Indian philosophy.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. So to get started, let's maybe unpack some of the essential terminology. The Sanskrit term darshana keeps popping up. What's the significance of that word?
Well, darshana literally translates to see or looking at.
Okay.
And it's the most common term used to refer to the various schools of Indian philosophy. What's particularly insightful here, I think, is the implication that philosophy isn't just abstract theorizing.
Right.
But it's a specific way of perceiving or understanding reality. It's about having a particular, vision.
A vision.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. And we also came across the term anvakoki. That sounds like it has a slightly different flavor, maybe.
It does, yeah. Anvakoki means critical inquiry or investigation.
Ah, okay.
So while darshana became the more widely used term, anvakoki was favored by some classical Indian thinkers like Chanakya in his Arthashastra. This highlights that even early on, there was an emphasis not just on seeing, but on rigorously analyzing and questioning what one sees. So both the vision and the critical examination were important aspects of these traditions, you see.
Right, so it's not just passively observing, but actively engaging with these ideas.
Got it.
Now let's move on to the historical roots. It seems these traditions stretch back millennia.
Oh, absolutely.
With some key figures shaping their early forms.
Absolutely. The philosophical traditions of the Indian subcontinent have incredibly deep roots. We're talking about figures like Yajnavalkya around the 8th century BCE.
Wow.
Who is associated with the early Upanishads. These texts are just foundational, containing ideas that would later be developed by, numerous schools.
They sound like the source, almost.
They're like the headwaters of a vast philosophical river, yeah.
And then we have the rise of the Shramana tradition. This seems like a really important turning point.
It was indeed pivotal. The Shramana tradition, which emerged alongside or perhaps even before some of the later Vedic developments, saw the rise of hugely influential thinkers and movements that often challenged the prevailing norms. Jain philosophy, for example, is traced back to Tirthankaras, like Parshvanatha, who potentially lived as early as the 9th century BCE.
9th century BCE.
Possibly, yes. And Mahavira, around the 6th century BCE, think about the ideas about the nature of the soul and reality being discussed that long ago.
That's mind-bogglingly ancient. And of course, we can't forget Gautama Buddha, founder of Buddhist philosophy, also around the 6th century BCE.
Right, a contemporary of Mahavira.
And then Sikh philosophy developed much later, didn't it? With Guru Gobind Singh. 17th, 18th century CE.
Precisely. So we're looking at a vast and evolving timeline here.
Definitely.
And it's crucial to recognize that these weren't isolated developments. They constantly interacted, influenced, and sometimes directly challenged each other over centuries.
Yeah, you can imagine the debates.
Oh, for sure. Leading to this rich tapestry of thought. Which brings us to a fundamental way these schools are often classified, the Astika and Nastika categories.
Okay, let's unpack these terms then. Astika and Nastika. How are these different labels applied? What's the core difference?
Traditionally, the primary criterion for this division is whether a school accepts the Vedas.
The ancient scriptures.
Exactly. Accepts the Vedas as a valid and authoritative source of knowledge. Now, while other factors like belief in Brahman and Atman or in an afterlife and devas are sometimes mentioned, the acceptance or rejection of Vedic authority is really the key differentiator. Though it's worth noting that even within the Astika schools, interpretations of those other concepts could vary significantly.
Okay, so the Astika schools give a thumbs up to the Vedas, and the Nastika schools say, not so much. Sounds simple on the surface.
Right, but as always, there's nuance.
I'm guessing there's more to it.
You're right. The Astika schools are generally considered the orthodox traditions, and this group includes the well-known six philosophies, the Antarshana,
Okay.
that's Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta.
We'll need to break those down later.
Definitely. And the Gnostica schools, often referred to as heterodox or Sramanic, reject the authority of the Vedas. These include Jainism, Buddhism, Ajivika, Ajnana, and Charvaka.
Some of those Gnostica school names, Ajivika, Ajnana, Charvaka, they sound quite distinct just from the names.
They are, and it's important to remember, as our sources highlight, that this orthodox-heterodox labeling, it's kind of a later academic framework.
Ah, okay. Not necessarily how they saw themselves.
Not necessarily, no. It wasn't how these schools always defined themselves or each other historically. The lines could be blurry, and there were diverse viewpoints within each category.
That's a crucial point. Labels can be helpful for understanding broad categories, but we need to be careful not to oversimplify.
Exactly.
Now, despite these fundamental differences, like accepting the Vedas or not, our sources also point out that many of these Indian philosophies share some common ground. What are some of these unifying ideas?
Yeah. Despite their disagreements on authority and, well, metaphysics and other things, a remarkable number of Indian philosophical systems converge on certain key concepts about the human experience.
Like what?
Think of dharma.
Righteous conduct, duty.
Yes. And karma, the fundamental principle of action and its inevitable consequences.
Okay.
Then there's samsara, the often perceived cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
The wheel of life.
Kind of, yeah. And dukkha, the pervasive sense of suffering or dissatisfaction inherent in existence.
These are concepts that have definitely, seeped into popular understanding in many parts of the world today.
They absolutely have. And practices like renunciation and meditation are also widely emphasized across various schools as means to address these fundamental aspects of existence.
Makes sense.
And for many, a central aim is liberation from dukkha and samsara, whether it's termed moksha or nirvana.
The ultimate goal.
The ultimate goal, yeah. Achieved through diverse spiritual and philosophical practices. So while the specific paths to get there might differ significantly, the recognition of suffering and the aspiration for liberation are pretty common threads.
So it's like different routes up the same mountain, perhaps? Is that a fair analogy?
That's a helpful analogy, yes. However, it's also important to note that Indian philosophy wasn't exclusively focused on this pursuit of moksha.
Oh.
These schools also engage with a broad spectrum of philosophical doctrines, sometimes mirroring intellectual explorations found in other ancient cultures, from metaphysics to epistemology, logic.
Right. So both a unique cultural flavor and these universal philosophical concerns. That's fascinating. Now let's delve deeper into the Astika or Hindu traditions. We know it's a very diverse set of schools, and Adi Shankara is often highlighted as a major figure.
Hindu philosophy is indeed incredibly rich and varied. Adi Shankara, a key proponent of Advaita Vedanta.
Non-dualism.
Exactly, non-dualism. He's certainly a towering figure, but he built upon a long and complex history. Early foundational texts like the Upanishads, dating back to around 1500 BCE.
Yeah, we mentioned those.
They were crucial in preserving and developing core ideas that branched out from earlier Brahmanical thought. Think of the Upanishads as like a fertile ground from which many later philosophical trees grew.
Nice image. And then we have the classic grouping of the six philosophies, the Antarshana. Can you give us a brief overview of these major schools? What's the gist of each?
Okay, the Antarshana represent six influential orthodox schools. First, there's Sakya. It's a dualistic system.
Dualistic meaning.
It posits puro consciousness and praki matter, or nature as fundamentally distinct and independent realities.
Okay, two basic principles.
Two basic principles. Their goal is the disentanglement of pua from prati to alleviate suffering. Interestingly, Sakya included both thinkers who believed in a god and those who didn't.
Atheistic and theistic strands within one school.
Yeah, which is quite interesting. This dualism, the idea of mind and matter as separate, it's a theme that has echoed in philosophical debates even in Western thought centuries later, hasn't it?
Absolutely. That's a fascinating connection. What's next in the six?
Next is yoga. Yoga shares a similar metaphysical framework with Saichar, also recognizing Puru and Prakriti.
Okay, so related.
Very related. However, yoga uniquely accepts the existence of a personal god, Ishvara, and places a strong emphasis on practical yogic disciplines. Meditation, postures, breath control. as a means to achieve liberation and control the mind.
The practice aspect is key there.
Very key. Then we have Nyaya, often called the school of logic. Its primary focus is on epistemology, the theory of knowledge and logic. How do we know what we know?
Right.
They accepted 4 pramajas, or valid means of knowledge: perception, inference, comparison, and testimony.
4 ways to know something.
Exactly. They were also strong advocates for direct realism, believing that we perceive things as they truly are.
So if I see a table,
You're seeing an actual table that exists independently of your mind, not just an idea of a table.
so a very grounded approach to knowledge. What's number 4?
Precisely. The 4th school is Vaishika, sometimes called the school of particularity. It's closely aligned with Nyaya. But it delves more into the metaphysics of substance, like what things are made of. It developed a theory of atomism.
Atoms in ancient India.
Yes, proposing that all physical reality is composed of fundamental, indivisible particles. However, a key difference from Nyaya is that Vaishika only recognized perception and inference as valid means of knowledge, not comparison or testimony.
Ah, a subtle but important distinction in how we can know things. Only 2 methods valid for them.
Exactly. The 5th school is Purva Mimamsa, or often just Mimamsa. This one centers on the interpretation and exegesis of the Vedas.
So really focused on the texts.
Very much so. With a strong focus on philology, the study of language in its historical context, and the proper understanding and performance of Vedic rituals. What do the Vedas mean, and how should we act based on them?
Gotcha. And the last of the 6.
And finally, there's Vedanta, which literally means the end of the Vedas. It focuses on interpreting the philosophical teachings found in the Upanishads, particularly concerning the relationship between Atman, the individual self or soul, and Brahman, the ultimate reality.
The big questions.
The really big questions. Vedanta itself branched into several influential subschools, like Adi Shankara's Advaita Vedanta.
Non-dualism again.
Right, emphasizing the ultimate oneness of Atman and Brahman. Then there's Visishtadvaita, or qualified non-dualism, and Dvaita, or dualism, each offering distinct interpretations of this core Atman-Brahman relationship.
So different takes on that connection.
Think of these sub-schools as different lenses through which to understand the same fundamental Vedic texts.
It's incredible how these 6 schools, all rooted in the Vedas, could develop such diverse and sometimes, well, opposing viewpoints.
They did, and sometimes they're further grouped, Nyaya Vaishika often go together because of their shared focus on logic and metaphysics.
Makes sense.
Sakya pair up due to their dualism and focus on liberation. And Mimamsa Vedanta are linked by their intense focus on Vedic interpretation. These groupings highlight shared concerns and approaches.
That helps organize it a bit.
And, as our source mentions, the Antarshana weren't the only Astika schools. Vigyorya, for example, identified other significant Hindu philosophical systems,
Oh, like what?
including various schools of Shaivism like Pashupada and Shaiva Siddhanta, also Pratyabhijya, which is a form of idealistic monism within Kashmir Shaivism,
Okay.
and even Patinidarshana focused on the intricacies of Sanskrit linguistics and the theory of meaning, like how words convey meanings Svuyavada.
Linguistics as philosophy.
Absolutely. And even Rasavada, which explored alchemical practices within a philosophical framework.
Alchemy is a philosophical system that really broadens our understanding of what philosophy could mean back then.
It really does. Shows the breadth of inquiry.
Now, let's turn our attention to the Sramant, or non-Vedic, traditions. As we discussed, these developed outside the Brahmanical framework.
That's right. The Shramanas represented a diverse set of ascetic and philosophical movements that developed their own unique systems of thought, often challenging or rejecting core tenets of Brahmanical religion.
So, real counter-movements in some ways.
In many ways, yes. They explored a wide range of ideas concerning the nature of the Atman, often in different ways than the Vedic schools.
Huh?
Also, atomism, ethics, materialism, atheism, skepticism, free will, the value of asceticism, and, importantly, nonviolence, ahimsa.
A real melting pot of ideas.
Definitely. Key Shramana philosophies included Jainism, early Buddhism, Charvaka, Ajnana, and Ajivaka. This period was a real hotbed of intellectual innovation.
It sounds like a period of significant intellectual ferment, particularly around the 5th and 4th centuries BCE.
It was. The Shramana tradition became highly influential during this time, significantly shaping the landscape of later Indian philosophy.
How so?
Either through the adoption of some of their ideas by Vedic schools later on, or through the development of counter-arguments and critiques in response to them, they forced everyone to sharpen their thinking.
Let's delve into some of the key Gnostica schools then. Jain philosophy is described as perhaps the oldest Indian philosophy to fully separate the body and soul. What does that entail?
Well, Jainism posits that every living being has an eternal individual soul, the jiva.
Okay.
And the soul is inherently distinct from the physical body. The soul, by its nature, possesses infinite knowledge, perception, bliss, and energy.
Sounds good.
It does. But these qualities are obscured by the accumulation of karma. And Jains understand karma in a very specific way, almost like a subtle physical matter.
Matter, not just consequences.
Right, a subtle matter that clings to the soul due to our actions and defilements like anger, greed, etc. The goal of Jain practice is to purify the soul by shedding this karmic matter.
Okay, and how is that liberation achieved in Jainism? How do you get rid of that karma?
Liberation, or moksha, is attained through the rigorous practice of the Ratnatraya, the three jewels.
Sure.
Right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct. This path emphasizes self-reliance, asceticism often involving fasting and other austerities, a strict commitment to nonviolence, ahimsa towards all living beings. This is absolutely central.
Ahimsa, yeah.
And also the principle of anekantavada,
What's that?
the relativity of viewpoints. It encourages understanding truth from multiple perspectives, acknowledging that reality is complex.
Interesting.
So while rejecting Vedic authority, Jainism shares concepts like karma, rebirth, samsara, and the ultimate goal of moksha with other Indian traditions.
But with their own unique spin.
Definitely. Its origins are traced way back to Rishabhadeva, the first Tirthankara, with a significant revival by Mahavira in the 6th century BCE, and recognition of Parshvanatha even earlier.
The principle of anekantavada, the idea that truth can be multifaceted, that seems particularly relevant even today in our complex world, doesn't it?
It really does, a very sophisticated epistemological stance.
Now, let's turn to Buddhist philosophy, another major product of the Srama movement.
Yes, Buddhist philosophy originated with the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha.
Right.
While also a Sramana tradition, it introduced groundbreaking concepts, most notably anatta.
Anatta. What does that mean?
The doctrine of not self or no self. This fundamentally distinguishes it from many other Indian systems that posit a permanent, unchanging soul or Atman.
No permanent self. That's a big one.
It's huge. Interestingly, though, early Buddhist thought was also influenced by some of the ideas found in the Upanishads, even as it rejected their core concepts like Brahman and Atman.
The idea of anatta, that there's no permanent, essential self, that's a really significant departure. How do they reconcile that with other core concepts like karma and rebirth? If there's no self, what gets reborn?
That's the central question, isn't it, in Buddhist philosophy? While rejecting a fixed, eternal self, Buddhism explains karma and rebirth through the continuity of consciousness and mental impressions.
How does that work?
Think of it like a flame passing from one candle to another.
Right.
There's a causal link, a continuity, but it's not an identical, persisting entity or thing that moves across. It's the process, the stream of consciousness conditioned by past actions.
So the effects carry on, but not a soul.
Exactly. So while sharing concepts like karma, samsara, dharma in a Buddhist context and the understanding of the impermanence of all things, Buddhism diverges sharply by denying the existence of a permanent Atman in the Vedic sense.
Okay.
Following the Buddha's passing, various Abhidharma schools emerged to systematically analyze and categorize Buddhist doctrines.
Trying to systematize it all.
Right. And later, the major branches of Shuvakayana, which includes traditions like Theravada, and Mahayana, which includes schools like Madhyamaka, with its emphasis on Shunyavada, or emptiness.
Emptiness, okay.
And Yogacara, focusing on Vijnanavada, or consciousness. Only these all developed, each offering nuanced interpretations of the Buddha's original teachings and the nature of reality.
So many schools within Buddhism, too.
Oh, yes. Diverse perspectives on the path to nirvana, all looking back to the Buddha but interpreting him differently.
It's clear that Buddhism is not a monolithic entity, but a diverse collection of philosophical schools.
Yeah.
What about Ejivika philosophy? It's described as a key rival to early Buddhism and Jainism.
Yeah, the Ejivika school, founded by Macaulay Gosala, is best known for its doctrine of niyati.
Niyati.
Absolute determinism, fate. They believed that all events, everything that happens, is entirely predetermined and unavoidable.
Wow, no free will at all.
Exactly. They completely rejected the concepts of free will and the efficacy of karma. Your actions don't change your fate.
That's bleak.
It's a strong stance. Interestingly, while atheistic in their view of a creator god, they did believe in the existence of individual Atman in all living beings.
So they believed in a soul but thought it was powerless against fate.
Essentially, yes. Which is a point of connection with some Vedic and Jain perspectives on the soul, even as they differed fundamentally on free will and karma.
Absolute fatalism, that's a very different way of understanding human agency and responsibility. And then we have Ajnana philosophy, characterized as radical skepticism.
Yes, Ajna was another Shramana movement, embodying radical philosophical skepticism. Their central tenet was basically that it was impossible to obtain definitive metaphysical knowledge.
Just can't know.
You can't know for sure or ascertain the absolute truth of philosophical propositions. Consequently, they believed that engaging in such speculation was ultimately useless for achieving salvation.
So don't bother trying to figure out the ultimate nature of reality.
Pretty much. Instead of proposing their own doctrines, they focused on refuting the claims of others, showing why their arguments didn't hold water.
Like philosophical critics.
Kind of, yeah. Imagine a philosophical tradition built entirely on saying we can't know for sure.
A philosophy rooted in the limitations of knowledge, that's a powerful, if maybe somewhat unsettling position. Finally, we have Charvaka philosophy, or Lokayata, often described as an ancient Indian school of materialism.
Exactly. Charvaka held a strictly materialistic worldview.
Meaning,
They asserted that direct perception, pratyeka, what you can see, hear, touch, is the only valid source of knowledge.
only perception counts.
Primarily, yes. They embraced empiricism and a form of skepticism, rejecting the validity of inference and testimony as means to establish universal truths.
So reasoning or hearing from others wasn't reliable for big truths.
Especially concerning the supernatural or metaphysical realms, yeah. They were strong critics of Vedic ritualism, the idea of an afterlife, souls, gods, all of it.
Okay.
While their primary texts are mostly lost, unfortunately, their teachings, reconstructed from the writings of their opponents.
Right, you often learn about them from those who argued against them.
Exactly. These reconstructions present a clear rejection of spiritualism and a focus on the material world. Enjoy life now, basically.
So a strong emphasis on tangible experience as the foundation of knowledge. It's remarkable to see this wide spectrum of philosophical positions flourishing in ancient India, from complex metaphysics to pure materialism.
It is truly remarkable. And as our source points out, when we compare these diverse Indian philosophies, their points of disagreement are fundamental. They're not minor quibbles.
What are the big ones?
Well, they differed significantly on the existence of a soul at Hirkan. Is there one? Zither, what's it like? Belief in rebirth, samsara. The value of asceticism versus more worldly, maybe even hedonistic pursuits, like in Charvaka. The role and authority of rituals. The importance of nonviolence, ahimsa, and vegetarianism, a huge divide there. The existence of free will versus determinism, like with the Ejavikas.
Right.
The concept of Maya, or illusion. Is the world real as we see it, or is it some kind of illusion? The existence of a creator God. What are the valid means of acquiring knowledge in the epistemology, the pramatas?
Yeah, big differences there.
Absolutely. Who has the ultimate epistemic authority? Is it the Vedas, the Buddhist Tripitaka, the Jainagamas, and of course the nature of salvation itself? What was moksha or nirvana? How do you get there?
That's a truly vast landscape of differing ideas on some of the most fundamental questions about existence.
Yeah.
It really highlights the dynamism of Indian intellectual history.
It really does. And beyond these core philosophical inquiries, there were also important developments in political philosophy.
Oh, right, the practical application.
Yeah. Early texts like Chanakya's Arthashastra in the 4th century BCE offered detailed insights into statecraft, economic policy, how to run a kingdom effectively.
Very practical.
Very. And Valuvar's Chorale, around the 5th century CE, extended ethical principles into the realm of politics and governance. More recently, of course, Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of ahimsa and satyagraha has had a profound global impact.
Gandhi's ideas certainly left an indelible mark on the 20th century and beyond.
No question.
And finally, our source touches upon the significant influence of Indian philosophy beyond the Indian subcontinent. It mentions figures like T.S. Eliot and Arthur Schopenhauer,
Yes.
as well as the American Transcendentalism movement of the 19th century.
Yes, many Western intellectuals have recognized the profound depth and insightful nature of Indian philosophical traditions. Schopenhauer, for instance, deeply admired Indian thought.
Way.
Oh, yes. He felt it resonated deeply with his own philosophical conclusions, particularly regarding the fundamental nature of reality and suffering. He famously called the Upanishads the production of the highest human wisdom.
I praise.
Indeed. And the transcendentalists, like Emerson and Thoreau, were significantly influenced by concepts they encountered in Indian scriptures, particularly the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita.
How did that influence show up?
Well, ideas about an underlying unity, the divinity within the individual, the importance of intuition, these resonated strongly with their worldview and found their way into their writings, contributing to a broader awareness of this rich intellectual heritage in the West.
Okay, let's try and unpack what we've explored in this deep dive into the diverse philosophical systems of the Indian subcontinent. It's been a journey.
It certainly has.
We've seen a rich tapestry, a really complex world of ideas. We've encountered everything from, the acceptance of ancient Vedic authority to outright radical skepticism, from beliefs in a permanent individual self, the Atman, to the revolutionary doctrine of no self, anatta,
Big contrasts.
and a multitude of different paths proposed for understanding reality and achieving liberation from suffering.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The sheer scope and depth of intellectual inquiry that flourished in ancient India laid a crucial foundation. It wasn't just abstract thought, it formed the basis for many of the spiritual and ethical frameworks that continue to shape human understanding and practice today.
Not just in India.
Not just in India, but across the entire globe. Consider, as we've mentioned, how concepts like karma and mindfulness—
Yeah, mindfulness is everywhere now.
Exactly. Concepts with their roots deep in these ancient traditions, they've become integrated into contemporary thought and practices in fields ranging from psychology to ethics to everyday wellness.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Hopefully this overview has provided a valuable, roadmap maybe, to navigate this complex and fascinating intellectual landscape.
A starting point.
A starting point, exactly. It really underscores the enduring importance of questioning our fundamental assumptions, of considering multiple perspectives, something beautifully captured in Jainism's Anekantavada, that idea of many-sidedness, and of recognizing that the human quest for knowledge and understanding has taken a multitude of forms throughout history, each offering unique insights.
And this raises an important question, maybe, for you to consider. Reflecting on the vast array of schools and ideas we've touched upon— Sakya, Yoga, Vedanta, Jainism, Buddhism, even Charvaka— which of their core concepts or approaches resonate most strongly with your own understanding of the world and your place within it?
Yeah.
What specific questions or areas of inquiry has this initial exploration sparked for you? Because, as you said, this is just a starting point. There's a whole universe of thought within these traditions waiting to be explored further.
Absolutely. Food for thought. Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about.
We'd love to hear from you.
Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.